The distress signal came through at 0300 hours, a tight band transmission encoded with an encryption standard no one had ever seen. It should have been impossible to decipher, yet the ship's onboard AI parsed it with eerie ease, converting the garbled data into something tangible. Names. Their names. Captain Alex Warren didn't like anomalies. He was a man of discipline, his worldview rooted in the tangible. Ghost ships and impossible transmissions didn't fit neatly into mission parameters. And yet, as the words scrolled across his command console, cold dread crawled up his spine. CPT, Alex Warren. Dr. Elias Carter. LT, Mason Griggs. Valerie Chun. His entire crew, listed in a transmission that predated their mission clearance by decades. Warren leaned forward, jaw tightening. Origin. Valerie Chun, the team's engineer, sat at the communication station, fingers dancing over the console. Triangulating. Christ, it's coming from the ocean floor. Depth, 9,200 meters. Shouldn't be possible, Mason Griggs muttered. The weapons specialist crossed his arms, his sharp eyes locked on the data feed. No transponder pings, no record of wreckage in that sector. We're talking deep, sir, way past any historical battlefield. Dr. Elias Carter, the team's xenotechnologist, was less restrained in his excitement. A signal like this at that depth? This is huge. It could be an undetected relic, a test vessel. Oh, something not even from our time. Warren shot him a look. We don't deal in speculation. Carter grinned, undeterred. Sure, but we do deal in discovery. The ship's AI interrupted with a tonal chime. Update. Signal designation identified. USS Perdition. Fleet registry unknown. Launched. Year 2097. Silence fell over the bridge. Warren exhaled slowly. That's 50 years from now. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Mason let out a low whistle. Well, shit. The deep-diving, submersible Erebus detached from the surface vessel, sinking into the abyss. The transition from sunlit waters to the black maw of the ocean was a descent into another world, the pressure of the deep squeezing around the hull like the grasp of something unseen. Inside, the four of them sat in silence, save for the occasional beeping of sonar. Chun checked the exterior camera feed. Visibility's dropping fast. We're hitting the thermocline. Warren kept his hands steady on the sub's control panel, eyes flicking between instruments. ETA. Carter leaned forward, peering at the sonar readout. 5 minutes until we reach the coordinates. Getting strong metallic returns now. Whatever's down there, it's big. The readings weren't just big. They were massive. The object below wasn't a scattered wreck. It was intact. Mason shifted in his seat, adjusting the strap on his harness. Feels wrong. Wrecks don't just sit pretty at the bottom of the ocean. Warren didn't argue. The submersible's floodlights pierced the darkness, and there it was. A behemoth of steel, slumbering beneath the waves, its angular silhouette at odds with any known warship design. The hull was seamless, its metal unervingly smooth, yet bore the scars of something far worse than time. Deep, jagged indentations, as though reality itself had torn through it. And across the hull, stamped in unblemished white letters. USS Perdition. Launched 2097. Valerie's breath caught. That's not possible. Carter, for once, was speechless. Warren exhaled. We're going in. The Perdition's interior was pristine. No rust, no silt, no sign that it had spent decades beneath the crushing weight of the ocean. If anything, the ship looked new, as if it had been waiting for them. The corridors stretched on in eerie silence, illuminated by faint emergency lights that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Every step echoed, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the ship. This isn't right, Mason muttered. He ran a gloved hand along the wall, frowning. Metal's warm. Chun pulled out a scanner. It shouldn't be. They pressed forward, weapons drawn. Not because they expected resistance, but because something about this place felt aware. At the central command console, Warren activated the ship's interface. The screen flickered to life, lines of text scrolling across the display in a language that shouldn't exist yet. And then, As if acknowledging their presence, the system translated. Crew status, missing. Mission status, failed. Warning, unauthorized entry detected. The overhead lights surged, flickering erratically. A voice crackled through the ship's speakers, distorted, hollow, but unmistakably human. "I see you." Chin gasped, stepping back. Carter's eyes widened. Mason raised his weapon. Warren's grip tightened on the console. "Identify." No response. Just static. Then the screen changed. "Welcome back, Captain Warren." His blood ran cold. Mason took a step closer. "Sir." More text appeared. "You shouldn't be here." A burst of static. The voice returned, clearer now, layered with something beneath it, something inhuman. "You were never meant to leave." And then the ship woke up. The lights surged to full brightness. The doors at the far end of the room slammed shut. The air pressure shifted, a deep hum resonating through the walls. The Perdition was not a tomb. It was waiting. Carter's scanner let out a sharp, warbling beep. He paled. Radiation spike, temporal radiation. Warren's breath came slow and measured. "Explain." Carter licked his lips, swallowing. "This ship, it's not from here. Not for now. And if this reading is right." He hesitated, horror creeping into his expression. "Then neither are we." The screen flickered again. More words appeared. "Don't let it leave." Something shifted in the corridor outside. A sound like movement. Not mechanical. Organic. Warren turned sharply. Weapons up. Mason barely had time to react before the lights cut out. And in the pitch black, something breathed. The emergency lights sputtered, struggling to hold back the darkness. The air inside the Perdition grew thick, pressing against them like unseen hands. It was no longer just silence that surrounded them. It was awareness. Mason Griggs had his rifle up, sweeping the corridor with practiced precision. The blackness beyond the flickering lights was a living thing, shifting in ways his eyes refused to track. "I don't like this," he muttered. "I really don't like this." Dr. Elias Carter clutched his scanner, its screen flickering wildly. Electromagnetic interference is spiking. Something's distorting the... A voice crackled through the ship's speakers, cutting him off. "You came back." It wasn't just static this time. It was layered, fractured, like multiple voices speaking over each other, overlapping and rearranging, searching for the right cadence. Valerie Chen's hands flew to the console, fingers dancing across the controls. "This system is active. Something is running it remotely." Captain Warren clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the screen as text began to unfurl across it. "Crew status missing. Mission status compromised. Attempting course correction." The words pulsed, and then the screen filled with data, too fast, too dense to process all at once. But one line stood out. "Captain Warren, time of death, T-36:42. A sharp, involuntary breath escaped him. Mason was at his side in an instant. What the hell does that mean? Carter ran the numbers in his head, his face tightening. 36 hours. He turned to Warren, voice strained. "It's saying you're going to die in 36 hours. The weight of those words settled over the room. Warren didn't flinch, but something in his expression hardened. "That's a prediction, not a fact." Chen's voice wavered. "What if it's not a prediction?" No one answered. A sudden thud echoed through the ship, distant but heavy. A sound not of machinery, but of something moving. Mason's grip on his rifle tightened. When not alone, they followed the sound through the dim corridors, past doors that sealed shut the moment they passed, as if the ship itself was hurting them. The deeper they went, the more wrong the architecture became. Walls that should have been flat curved at impossible angles. Doorways led to places that shouldn't exist. It was subtle, but Warren noticed it. They all did. Carter whispered as they walked. "This ship isn't just advanced. It's reconfiguring." Mason gave him a sideways glance. "Like it's alive?" No, Carter hesitated. "Like it's remembering." Then they reached the bridge. It was pristine, untouched by time or decay. Screens hummed softly, flickering with data. But the moment they stepped inside, every monitor in the room shifted to display the same thing. Their faces, their names, their records. Not just military files. Personal information, medical histories, birthdays, conversations they had years ago, logged and transcribed. Then, something worse. Footage of them inside the ship. Not from their body cams. From angles that shouldn't exist. As if the ship had always been watching. The most recent footage played. Warren, standing at the console. Carter, checking his scanner. Mason looking back down the hallway. But there was someone else in the shot. A figure in the shadows, standing just out of view. Watching them. She made a strangled noise. That wasn't there before. The figure was wrong. Its proportions slightly off, its movements lagging just behind reality. The footage looped, and the figure stepped closer each time. Mason raised his rifle toward the door. If this is a joke, it's not funny. Then, the footage changed. A new timestamp. The same room. But now they were all dead. Warren's body lay crumpled against the console, blood pooling beneath him. Carter's face was twisted in agony, frozen in a silent scream. Chen's fingers were still gripping the keys, her head bent at an unnatural angle. Mason's rifle was snapped in two, his body slumped against the wall. The timestamp read T00:07. 7 minutes from now. Then the power surged. The ship screamed. The monitors exploded in bursts of static, and the entire vessel lurched, the metal groaning like a wounded animal. The lights strobed violently, casting everything into a nightmare of frozen images, shadows twisting, figures moving in the gaps between perception. And then, the bridge door slammed shut behind them. A voice whispered through the ship's speakers, clearer now. Familiar. You were never meant to leave. Warren turned sharply, gun raised, but there was nothing there. Carter grabbed his arm, face pale. Captain, we have to go. Mason was already at the door, trying to override the lock. Chan was shaking, her hands barely able to keep steady as she worked the console. Something's rewriting the system. I can't shut it out. Another sound, this time closer. A wet, dragging noise. Footsteps that shouldn't belong. And then a whisper, right behind them. But you came back anyway. Warren spun, finger tightening on the trigger, and saw himself. Not a reflection, not a projection. Himself, standing at the far end of the bridge, his face hidden in shadow, but his stance unmistakable. The figure watched him, unmoving. Then it tilted its head, and Warren knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was smiling. His own voice came from its mouth, but the words weren't his. You won't leave this time. The ship's alarm screamed, and the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the bridge. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Mason's flashlight flicked on, its beam cutting through the pitch black, sweeping wildly across the room. Nothing. No one. But Warren knew what he had seen. He had been staring at himself, or something pretending to be him. And now it was gone. Chen's hands trembled as she worked at the console. Power's been severed. Whatever's controlling this ship, it doesn't want us in here. Carter's scanner beeped erratically, pulsing with incomprehensible data. We need to get to the core. His voice was breathless, urgent. If I can access the central system, I might be able to. A deep, metallic groan reverberated through the ship. Not an alarm. A heartbeat. Mason tensed, raising his rifle. What the hell was that? And the lights flashed back on, flooding the bridge in harsh white. For half a second, everything seemed normal. Then Warren saw the walls. They had changed. The bridge was no longer the same sterile, mechanical environment it had been moments before. The metal had shifted, pulsing with veins of something darker, something organic. The panels that had once been smooth were now textured, uneven, like the ribcage of some colossal beast. The ship was changing, or maybe Warren thought it was remembering what it had always been. Carter took an uneasy step forward, his fingers tightening around his scanner. This ship isn't just a machine. It's something else. Something aware. Mason exhaled sharply. That aware thing just tried to show us our own corpses. Document. I don't think it's our friend. Before anyone could respond, the temperature plummeted. Their breath fogged in the air, and a slow, creeping hiss filled the room, like air escaping from something vast and unseen. Then came the voices. Not over the speakers this time. Right behind them. Warren turned first, weapon raised. But the moment he did, the air rippled and figures stepped out of the walls. Not from doors, not from vents, from the ship itself. They had no faces, no clear features, just distorted shapes wrapped in the hollow suggestion of uniforms. Twisted mockeries of the original Perdition crew. They moved wrong, their joints bending at unnatural angles, flickering between one position and the next like broken film reels. Chen gasped, stumbling back. No, this isn't real. One of the figures turned its head toward her, or where its head should have been. Then it spoke. Her own voice. You were here before. Chen's breath hitched in her throat. Another voice. Carter's voice. You never left. The figures moved. Not walking, just appearing closer. Mason fired first, his gun roaring in the enclosed space. The bullet tore through one of the figures, but there was no resistance, no impact. Just a ripple like a stone cast into a black pool. The thing didn't even flinch. Then it lunged. It didn't move like a body should. One moment it was still. The next, it was on top of Mason. Warren reacted on instinct, grabbing Mason by the collar and yanking him back before the thing's fingers could sink into him. They weren't solid. They were erasing him, as if Mason were being rewritten out of reality itself. Chun grabbed a fire extinguisher from the emergency panel and sprayed it directly into the figures. The moment the cold chemical foam touched them, they convulsed, their forms warping, distorting, screaming. Then they were gone. The bridge fell into silence once more. Carter's hand shook as he checked his scanner. That wasn't an illusion. That was a temporal displacement. His voice was hollow. Those things weren't just things. They were echoes, fragments of us, versions of us that he swallowed. Never made it out. Mason exhaled shakily. Yeah, let's not join them. Warren straightened, his mind racing. This wasn't just a ghost ship. It was a trap, a loop, and they had stepped right into it. And yet, they were still alive, which meant there was a way out. Chun looked at Warren, her voice unsteady. Captain, what do we do? He didn't hesitate. We get to the core. The deeper they went, the worse it got. The Perdition wasn't a wreck. It wasn't abandoned. It was becoming something else, reshaping itself with every step they took. The walls grew wetter, the air denser, until the corridors no longer felt like hallways of ship, but the throat of something living. Carter whispered as they walked. This ship was never just a war machine. Mason didn't look at him. Then what the hell was it? Carter hesitated. A containment unit. Warren's mind clicked the pieces into place. The abandoned logs. The message in blood. Don't let it leave. This wasn't a simple anomaly. The Perdition wasn't lost. It was sent back. A warning, a prison, a last desperate attempt to contain whatever had been inside it. And now, it wasn't contained anymore. They reached the core chamber. The doors were already open. Inside, the room pulsed with an unnatural light, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. And at the center, a thing. It was no longer human, if it had ever been. A shifting, black mass, vaguely humanoid but fluid, its shape never staying the same for more than a second. It stood waiting, or perhaps it had always been there, watching them long before they had even arrived. The moment Warren stepped inside, it turned. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, with all their voices at once. You were always coming back. Mason fired. The bullets vanished before impact. Chun clutched the side of her head. It's in my thoughts. The thing shifted, taking on Warren's own silhouette. Its face flickered between expressions, his expressions. Then slowly it smiled. You can't break the loop. Warren raised his weapon, but he knew it wouldn't do anything. Because the Perdition wasn't just trapping them. It was remaking them. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring. The core was destabilizing. Carter grabbed Warren's arm, voice desperate. We need to overload it. If we break the containment, we break the loop. The thing moved. Fast. Warren didn't think. He grabbed the emergency detonator on his belt and slammed it against the core's failsafe panel. A countdown began. The thing screamed. Mason yanked Chun toward the exit. Carter followed, his breath ragged. And Warren turned back. The thing was still looking at him, unfazed, still wearing his face. As he backed toward the door, it spoke one last time. "You will return." The core erupted, and the world went white. Light engulfed everything. For an instant, Warren felt weightless, as if reality itself had peeled away. Sound dissolved. Time fractured. He caught glimpses of something. Not the past, not the future, but everything in between. The Perdition breaking apart in an infinite loop. Himself, standing in the same place, over and over, watching the same explosion bloom across an endless cycle. Then came the pull. Gravity reasserted itself in a brutal instant. Warren slammed against the cold floor, his breath ripping from his lungs. The sound of a deep, mechanical groan rolled through the ship, followed by the deafening roar of collapsing metal. The core had gone critical. Mason was already up, dragging Chun to her feet. Carter clutched his chest, gasping for air. "We have to move," Mason shouted, barely audible over the chaos. The walls of the ship shuddered, twisting unnaturally. The corridors that had once been steel were now organic, pulsating, growing darker as the ship's very essence fought to stay intact. They ran. The path they had taken before was gone, rewritten, replaced by hallways that stretched in impossible directions. Time flickered, breaking down. 1 second they were sprinting. The next, they were watching themselves run ahead, like echoes moving faster than their own bodies. Chun gasped. "We're already here." "No, don't stop," Warren barked. Behind them, the thing howled. Not pain, not rage. Recognition. It wasn't dead. It was becoming something else. The exit was ahead, the submersible. The docking bay had partially collapsed, water rushing through broken hull plating. The air abyss was still intact, its lights flickering, but the airlock was jammed. Carter scrambled forward, slamming his fist against the control panel. "Systems are down." Mason ripped open an emergency override panel, yanking at manual release levers. Come on. The lights flickered. Warren turned. The thing was standing in the doorway, half submerged in shadow. It no longer pretended to be him. It no longer needed to. The ship was falling apart, but it remained, watching, waiting. Then it stepped forward. The ship's alarm screamed, the hull buckling. The explosion was spreading, erasing everything. Mason roared, putting every ounce of strength into the final lever. The airlock opened. "Get in," Warren ordered. Chun went first, practically throwing herself inside. Carter stumbled after her, followed by Mason. Warren was last, keeping his rifle trained on the thing as he backed into the sub. The doors sealed. Mason jumped into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over controls. "Come on, baby, come on." The docking clamps wouldn't release. Warren spun to Carter. "Override it." Carter frantically typed commands. "I'm trying. It's not responding. The thing was outside the viewport now, standing just beyond the sub, watching. The ship behind it was breaking apart, but it didn't move. It didn't have to, because Warren understood, in that moment, what it truly was. It wasn't just part of the Perdition. It was the Perdition. The ship had never been a vessel. It had been a prison, a cage for something that wasn't supposed to exist. And now, that cage was breaking. The ship's final warning echoed in his mind. Don't let it leave. He clenched his jaw. He wouldn't. Mason slammed his fist against the controls. Clamps are fried. We're stuck. Warren didn't hesitate. He grabbed the emergency hatch release and ripped it down. The Erebus lurched, the mechanical arms holding it in place, finally disengaging. The sub plummeted, crashing into the abyssal depths just as the ship detonated. The explosion didn't ripple outward. It imploded. A vacuum of energy collapsed the Perdition into itself, folding time and space in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The thing inside didn't scream. It didn't fight. It accepted. And then, in an instant, the ship was gone. Silence. The Erebus drifted, untouched by the unnatural destruction that had consumed the Perdition. The only sound was the labored breathing of the survivors. Chun sat against the wall, staring blankly ahead. Carter rubbed his face, his hands shaking. Mason let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. We made it. The words barely registered. Warren watched the empty ocean where the Perdition had been, where the thing had been, where they had been, an endless loop that had finally been broken. Except, had it? Carter's voice cut through the stillness, hesitant. Captain. Warren turned. Carter was staring at his scanner, at the readings it was displaying. Warren moved closer. The screen was pulsing, the data scrolling in that same eerie font from the ship's terminal. And then, the message appeared. Welcome back, Captain Warren. Warren's breath caught in his chest. No, they had escaped. They had broken the loop. And yet, Mason turned to Chun, forcing a weak grin. We did it. We're going home. Chun didn't respond. Slowly, she raised a shaking hand, pointed to the console. Warren followed her gaze. The mission clock, the one that should have been counting forward. It was counting backward. A cold, horrifying certainty settled over him. They had never left. The ship's warning hadn't been about stopping the thing. It had been about stopping them. Because the Perdition hadn't just been containing something. It had been sending something back. A loop. An inescapable cycle. Warren's hands curled into fists. He could still hear it, deep in the marrow of his bones. You will return. The ocean outside was empty. Silent. Waiting.